Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jacqueline, and I am the Expeditions Manager with Earth Echo International. We are so excited to have classrooms joining us from all around the globe today as we are going to explore the deep sea aboard the ROV Falkor. So before we get started, I would like to introduce one of the classrooms that is on live with us today, and that is Mrs. Martinez's class at Harlow Elementary. Would you guys like to go ahead and say hello? Hi there. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll come back to you for questions in a bit, okay? Fabulous. Sounds great. So for those of you at home or watching from your classroom, we would love participation from you as well. So you can do that by either using the chat that is directly below your viewer on YouTube. And then if you're watching on the Earth Echo website, we also have a Google form. So that is beneath the viewer, and you can feel free to use that throughout the presentation. So now we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Eric Cortez, who is coming to us live aboard the ROV Falkor. Hi, how are you?
Hi, everybody. Good. How's it going?
It's going great. We're so excited to be on live with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you're doing?
Sure. We're out here off the coast of Costa Rica in the Pacific Ocean. It's a beautiful day out here. It's pretty hot. We're just a few degrees north of the equator out here, and we're on the ROV Falkor. This is obviously the back deck. We're in transit right now to another one of our sites, and this is the ROV Sebastian that we've been diving with over the last couple of weeks. You're looking at sort of the back end. Let me take you around to the business end of the ROV. This vehicle can go down to 4,500 meters, so almost out of imagery and samples with it. This is one of the manipulator arms that we use to collect samples. Down here you can see the manipulator fingers that can pick up even very delicate corals and sponges and other creatures on the deep sea floor. Once we pick them up, we'll put them into one of these sampling containers. These are just little tubes with stoppers on them that we can put samples in, and we can fit a lot of these onto the front of the vehicle, or the basket, we call it. Or we'll put things in these temperature insulated bio boxes. So these are thick walled boxes that will hold temperature. They seal on the top. The animals down in the deep sea live at very cold temperatures, and it's very hot out here. And so we need to make sure that they stay cold so they can be alive when they get back up in really good shape. These are push cores. These we can take sediment samples with. They'll seal at the top so you can push them into the mud, and then you lift it up and the mud comes with it. We can look at the chemistry in the mud. We can look at all the little organisms that are in there. This is always fun. This is the slurp sampler. It's like a big vacuum hose, and we can suck things in on this end, and then they go up through the tube into these canisters that can spin around, so we can take 8 different samples in 8 different places. With that, a whole series of different cameras. This is the main one that you'll see a lot of highlights from. It's a full 4K camera with this great zoom. It's almost like bringing a microscope down there. It's amazing the resolution that we can achieve with that. All of the different lights that are up here that can help illuminate the dark deep sea. Light doesn't penetrate deeper than about 200 to 300 meters for our eyes, but down to about 1,000 meters for the more sensitive eyes of a lot of the deep sea organisms. So we have to bring light with us to be able to see what's down there. So a ton of light up here, a bunch of other cameras spread all over the vehicle so we can go on and the pilots can fly it. If we, well, let's see, there's a couple other sensors in there. There's a forward-looking radar. There's some oceanographic sensors, so we're collecting data everywhere we go with the vehicle. And then we're using a second vehicle that we brought with us ourselves with some engineers that are on our team. This is called the wire flyer. This is a big clump weight that's lowered on the wire off of the ship, and we tow this behind the ship. We go a few miles an hour. It's fairly slow. And tow this, and then this is the flyer part of it with the wings here. This carries a bunch of oceanographic sensors to tell us the temperature, the depth, the pH, the oxygen levels. And this flies up and down on this wire very, very quickly so we can get this nice profile through the.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cortez. That's really exciting. We got to see some of the awesome equipment that you have there. I think we might have dropped the connection just for a minute. But while we are waiting for you guys to rejoin, Mrs. Martinez's class, can we head over to you? And Carly, are you available to answer some questions while we wait for that connection to come back? Do you guys have any questions yet from Harlow Elementary?
She's working her way up here. We have quite a few questions, but some of them have already been answered by his presentation. But we've got a couple more. Here's Haley.
I'm here to answer any questions we have.
Thank you, Carly. Hi, Haley.
Hi.
How are you? What's your question, dear?
My question is, do you collect animal data? And if you do, does the methane gas affect the area?
That's a great question. Carly, can you answer that one?
Sure, I'll take my best stab at it. Eric can talk more about how the methane collection works, but we do take all kinds of animal data, and primarily we are doing that by observing the animals in their natural environment with the video from the ROV. We're looking at how they're working, what they're doing, and then they're also collecting specimens so that they can get a better idea of the genetics, and so understand what species are there, if there are new species being discovered, and other information that they can obtain that way.
Great, thank you.
Hi, can you guys hear us now?
Yes, we have you back. Oh, good. Hi. We were doing a couple questions. Is that okay before you guys get started again?
Yeah, that's perfect. We can just, we can go straight to questions if you like. That's great.
Okay.
I heard Carly answer that one, and she was right on. The methane definitely affects the communities. We see very, very different organisms at the methane seeps than we see further offshore at the seamounts. A lot of them have bacterial symbionts, especially the tube worms and mussels, and the famous Yeti crab that grows bacteria on their arms as they do their little dance. And those bacteria are taking the chemical energy and producing food for those animals. So they're reliant entirely on food that's produced locally from chemical energy through chemosynthesis, rather than the food coming from the surface through photosynthesis and all the organisms that are dying and settling down that a lot of the other communities use as their food source. So really a totally different community at the seeps. Yeah. So Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lisa Levin. I'm a professor at Scripps and also one of the scientists aboard. And in addition to what Carly said, which is that we learn by observing through the video, we also collect samples and bring them on board. And almost every group that's on board here is doing chemical and other biogeochemical analyses on the animals to study how they use methane. So they're studying which animals eat carbon that came from methane using stable isotopes. Some of the microbiologists are actually putting little tags on methane and incubating the animals to see, and the microbes to see who can use it. And we have all different kinds of science going on to look at how methane gets used.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. And I think we have a young lady with a question. What's your name, dear?
Malia.
Hi, Malia. What's your question?
What kind of machines do you use to study the sand and rocks under the water?
Great question. Thank you.
The sand and rocks. Yeah, I like sand and rocks. And I'm so happy you asked that question because there's this amazing wealth of life in the sand and rocks, even though we can't see it with our eyes all the time. When we bring them on board, we can using a microscope. So to sample the sand, we use tubes. I think Eric showed you the tube cores. And we bring them on board and put them through a fine mesh to separate out sand from animals. Unfortunately, the seamounts, the sand is so big that it doesn't go through the mesh. So we have to sort through a lot of that, but we use a microscope to find the animals and see who's living. With the rocks, we actually do a couple things. We pick animals off the rocks that we can see, but we also let them crawl off the rocks overnight, and we wash the water through a sieve and check it under the microscope the next day. And sometimes we find amazing tiny little things.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mrs. Martinez class, did you guys have one other question, or would we like to move on to the next part of the presentation?
We can go ahead and move on. We've got a few more questions, but you may answer them in the next part of the presentation.
Sounds great. We'll come back to you. Don't worry. So Dr. Cortez, can you tell us a little bit more about the Costa Rican deep expedition, and particularly the new species that you're founding? And also, we saw some footage. We just released an expedition all about plastic in the ocean called Plastic Seas with Earth Echo. And we noticed that you guys found some things down deep that shouldn't be there. And can you talk a little bit about that? And also the marine protected area that you're in, and why isn't the deep sea part of the marine protected area?
Sure. Let's see. There's a lot there. We're working on two major kind of ecosystem types. So we're working on the natural methane seeps along the margin, which we talked about a little bit, and then we're more recently in the last 10 days or 2 weeks or so, we've been working our way along the seamounts, these underwater mountains from the coast of Costa Rica all the way out to Cocos Island National Park. And we did a couple dives deep in the national park itself, and then went past it and looked at a few areas past there. The national park was set up for the really amazing habitats that are on land on the island, and also the areas that people can scuba dive to. It's one of the best scuba diving spots in the entire world. And it was set up to protect those, but when it created a border around there that excluded fishing from those areas to protect those communities. But a lot of that, that square footage inside the park is in the deep sea. So no one had ever been deeper than about 450 meters down in that part of the world. And so we did some of the first really deep water exploration with Sebastian last week and found just some phenomenal communities, these big deep sea coral communities at about 1,000 meters down. And then we transition into sponges and some brittle star beds and all of these really fantastic things that are protected, but we didn't even know that they existed. So now what we've been doing is surveying the other seamounts that are outside of that protected area and along this chain that connects that national park to the coast of Costa Rica over about 200, almost 300 miles. And we conducted the first ever exploration of a bunch of those seamounts and found some new habitats. What we are pretty convinced are some new species. We have a bunch of different experts out here with us, and they study different kinds of animals, or they study the chemistry or the microbes. But our experts who work on the corals and the worms and the other animals like that, we think we have, I don't know, at least a dozen new species that no one recognized, and a few things that we're having trouble putting into even larger groups of animals. We're not even sure what group some of these things belong to. So there's a lot of work coming up to use genetics and to use microscopes and just the morphology of these animals to figure out what they are. But we're pretty sure we have a good number of new species already, which we're really excited about. when we did a dive on the subduction zone, so the seamounts that are further offshore are on the Cocos Plate, one of the continental plates, and Costa Rica itself is on the Caribbean Plate. Well, the Cocos Plate is sliding underneath the Caribbean Plate, and so it's subducting, going down underneath the other continental plate, and it's bringing the seamounts with it. And so those seamounts they push up on the Caribbean Plate, and that's what causes all the seepage. Those fluids that are being squeezed out of the continental plate are coming out and carrying methane and hydrogen sulfide with it and causing the seepage. But where that subduction is happening is the deepest part in this whole area, and it's about 4,000 meters down. And we went down to visit that, and at the deepest part of the trench, where it forms this sort of trough, there was a bunch of plastic down there and just trash. And we were unfortunately not incredibly surprised to find it there, but it was present, and it shows that even in places that we've never seen with our eyes, we're already leaving our mark, that humans are already there in one way through the disposal of our waste. At one point, we saw actually a big pile of trash. It looked like the whole thing had just been thrown overboard from a ship. And it was stunning, and it was kind of depressing and sad to see something like that. But it just, it makes us feel like this work is even more important to try and preserve some of these really remarkable habitats before too much of that happens in these areas.
I agree. And thank you guys for getting out there and exploring so deep so that we know that that is happening. With those findings, do you think it would be possible to extend the range of the marine protected area? And one other question, you said 4,000 meters deep. Can you give us an idea of how deep that is, whether it's with football fields or some way that we can imagine how deep 4,000 meters is?
Very. 4,000 meters is roughly, a football field is about 100 meters, a little bit less. So that's 40 football fields. It's over 2 miles down. It's very deep and normally thought of as kind of out of reach, but we're seeing more and more. We have a couple colleagues who are out here with us from the University of Costa Rica. They're some of the lead investigators in the project, and they're taking a lot of this information back to try and support conservation efforts. People think that the deep sea is sort of out of sight and out of mind, and that it's just back and empty and we can throw whatever we want down there and we'll never see it again. But that's, we're learning that that's not true. It has these really remarkable habitats. It's linked to the surface. The nutrients that are formed over some of these habitats that are recycled come back up to the surface and fuel productivity. The deep sea is linked to the surface ocean, and it's vital to the health of our whole planet. And if it deserves as much protection as any other place on Earth. So we were lucky to actually host the Vice Minister of the Environment of Costa Rica on board. She came on board for a tour, and we talked to her about our findings. The lead for Conservation International in Costa Rica was also on board. So by working directly with the scientists in Costa Rica and the decision makers, the people who have the power to actually increase the size of that national park, we're trying to make sure that this information is used as quickly as possible and as much as possible to try and preserve some of these habitats.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. We did have another question. Could you give us an idea of what morphology means? Because you were talking about finding new species and having trouble even placing them in the animal groups that we currently have. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Well, we have a couple of different ways of discovering what animals are and what species they are. And one of the approaches involves looking at their body and the structures on their bodies. Greg Rouse has been meticulously taking magnificent pictures, both under the microscope and with his assistant Avery off the microscope, and looking at the shape and structures of every little tentacle and groove and bristle and so on in the animals helps identify them. And that's what we mean by morphology, the body shape. But the other big tool that's going to be in use is the genetics, and many people on board are taking tissue samples and will ultimately provide the DNA sequence, which will help place the animals both in broader groups, but also help determine whether it's a new species.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. That was a great explanation. So I'm going to take it back to Mrs. Martinez's class, if that's okay, for some more questions. Hi, what's your name?
Cole,
Hi, Cole. What's your question?
what's the difference in sea life on deep sea coral versus shallow?
So deep sea coral versus shallow coral?
Shallow seas?
Oh, shallow seas. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The more that we study the deep sea corals, the more similarities we see with shallow water. A lot of the animals that you would think of that you would see on a shallow water coral reef we're finding in the deep ocean. We saw a few different types of really big sharks down there, lots of fish, some that looked like they were using the coral habitats as a nursery. We saw a whole bunch of little baby anglerfish and some other species that were hanging out in there on some of the, not just the corals, but also some of these other organisms that Lisa is particularly interested in, the xenophyophores, which are single cells, but they can be as big as a baseball. There we found fish eggs inside those the other day, so they're creating this nursery habitat. But the deep water coral reefs are, you know, as many colors as you would see in shallow water. We see in the deep, they have these big brittle stars that live on the corals themselves and have a symbiosis where the coral provides a home for the brittle star and access to more food, and the brittle star keeps the coral clean, just like you would think of in a shallow water coral reef where there are cleaning stations and there are all of these symbiotic partnerships. We're starting to find those in the deep ocean as well. They go through nutrients recycling, and we're starting to learn more about how important the sponges are in this community for filtering the water and turning all the productivity that rains down from the surface back into nutrients, which can upwell into shallow waters and fuel more of that productivity. So it's this big loop, and the deep water habitats, the deep sea corals, are a vital part of that and vital to the health of the whole ocean in general.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Do we have another question?
One more.
All right. Hi there. What's your name?
Caden,
Hi, Kaden. What's your question?
my question is that we are learning persuasive writing, and what things can kids do to persuade adults to help step into ocean plastic?
That's a wonderful
That's a great-
question. I love it. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
That's a great question. There are a lot of things that you can do. Just having the conversation with your parents about what you're learning and bringing that information to them and talking to them about, the choices that we all make every day about the kind of bag that we use or, the kinds of things that we buy. Those are really important things. And that's definitely something that kids can talk to their parents about, and just having these conversations. Tell them that, that there's trash in the deep ocean. Tell them that you have learned about the fact that there are corals in the deep sea. A lot of people don't even know that. So just, your awareness of these issues and these really amazing habitats, these resources that we have right offshore. Just talking to your parents about that is a big step. It means a lot. Do you want to add to that?
Maybe, and you can pull them into some of the amazing YouTube videos that are on board, that are available. You can watch on the Schmidt Ocean sites, with Falkor cruises, but also there's other cruises that NOAA has on the Okeanos and on the Nautilus, and getting your parents engaged in that and getting them to think the deep sea is really cool could be very helpful.
I love that. So I had a question. You guys, and Dr. Cortez, you showed us the ROV Sebastian. Could you talk a little bit more about the technology that went into building the ROV and how it works?
Wow, there's so much new technology in there. It's a new vehicle. It was only built. Let's see. It's been it's right here. It's been operating just for this is the 3rd year now that scientists have been using it, and it's incredibly advanced. The cameras are really amazing. The lighting, as I talked about, that's on there. Some of the different sensors that they have. And a lot of the control systems that are on the ship that go into it. I mean, they had to innovate. They had to create a lot of these because many of those tools didn't exist. There are some things that you can get from commercial companies, but a lot of it they had to invent as they went along. So the controls for the camera are different than any other place. They're unique here. The way the video comes in to the control room is unique for Sebastian and for Falkor. Just really, the camera still just blows me away. It's like bringing a microscope down to the deep sea, and you can see things that even when we get the specimens back and we're looking with our own eyes, we can't see. Getting a chance to bring that much data, that visual information up from the deep sea into the screens that we can watch is an incredible tool.
Yeah, and the fact that we can watch them underwater while everybody's alive and not affected by humans is amazing, because we've been able to see some really interesting behavior, interactions among the species, and feeding and things like that.
That is so exciting and fun. So that goes along with a question that we have from one of our viewers on YouTube, and that is, I'll throw it out to both of you because you might have different answers. What is the coolest thing that you have ever found or discovered while on expedition? I know it's a tough question.
That's not fair. Like, wow. I mean, one of my favorites happened on this expedition, but it has happened to me a few times. Once when I was on the Falkor a little over a year ago. But we found corals in, obviously you can tell what I work on mostly, but we found corals in places that we really didn't expect. We have a concept for where corals can live and where they can build reefs. And that concept didn't include a lot of places that we've discovered just in recent years out in the Central Pacific and here off the coast of Costa Rica. It was thought that the conditions just weren't great for coral growth. The pH is very, very low. And in more acidic waters, it's very difficult for corals to lay down their skeleton because they need carbonate. Calcium carbonate is what their skeleton's made out of, limestone. And that mineral, the lower the pH is, the less likely that is, or the more energy it takes to form calcium carbonate. And the pH is so low that we just thought corals couldn't exist out here. And yet there they are. And we found them on this cruise. And the first time they've been documented anywhere for about 1,000 miles at these depths. And so it's really remarkable, and it was something that I kind of hoped I might see, but I really didn't think we'd find it, and we did. But everywhere we go, we run into surprises. That every day is my new favorite day. Because it's really every day we make another discovery. It's an amazing, I'm really lucky to have this job and to be able to do something I love, but that's what keeps me coming out here over and over again.
Oh, it's really lovely. And thank you for sharing that story, Dr. Cortez. That's great.
Well, Lisa is going to answer too.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa. Thank you. Yes,
I'm going to pick one of my favorite findings. or discoveries is also from the Costa Rica margin. We made this discovery about 10 years ago, but it is the finding of what we have called a hydrothermal seep, where we discovered a place where the methane seeps we had been studying were also hot. And they were hot because a seamount being subducted under the continent was basically the plumbing bringing heat up from inside the earth. And maybe you've heard of hydrothermal vent habitats, which are hot springs on the seafloor. Scientists for a long time thought hydrothermal vents and methane seeps were really different ecosystems. They shared a lot of properties and animal types, but this discovery of a hydrothermal seep was a blending of those two ecosystems, and we found vent animals and seep animals living together there. We call this place, this is Jaco Scar, and on this cruise, we've discovered some new hot areas around Jaco that we hadn't known about before, and with even hotter, warmer water than we had found before. So we keep expanding our knowledge. But this blending of ecosystems that we didn't know could co-occur was one of my favorite findings.
That is a really excellent discovery. How amazing. So we had another question come in from YouTube. And are there any other human impacts that you've seen on this expedition that has surprised you other than that unfortunate pile of trash that you found?
You to talk about the fishing line, or do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we had an unfortunate little surprise yesterday where we saw some fishing line on the seafloor, and we've seen it at a few places at the seamounts that we've been exploring. Yesterday, some of that fishing line got tangled up in the long tether that connects the ship to the ROV, and we spent quite a while on the surface trying to untangle it and make sure that it didn't get worse and that it didn't get caught in the props of the ship. And that was a very unfortunate discovery, and unfortunately it's something that we've seen again and again. We've had to move in some cases where we were trying to dive on a seamount, but there was already a fishing boat there laying out their long lines to fish right in that area, because the fishermen know that these places exist and they know that they're great fish habitat. That's why they keep coming back. It's no coincidence that when we come out to the seamounts, the fishermen are right there where we want to be, because we're both looking for the same thing. And they've known about it for a long time. We just haven't ever directly laid our eyes on it. We haven't had the technology that we have now with Sebastian to do that. And so it's really unfortunate that that is occurring. It's something that we hope to relieve the pressure on the seamounts by helping to create an extension or a new national park over the seamounts. And in the end, you know, we're not trying to keep the fishermen from fishing at all. You know, we don't want to take away their livelihood, but it needs to be done in a responsible manner, and it needs to be done in a place where they're not having other unseen consequences. Because if the fishermen are right over a coral reef on a seamount and they do damage that coral reef, the fish aren't going to come back to breed there, and the fish stocks are going to go away. And so if you're not protecting these habitats, it's really more harmful to their livelihood to not protect them than it is to protect them and fish, you know, somewhere different than they're fishing now. So we're working really hard on that with Jorge Cortez, who's here in the University of Costa Rica.
That's great. And I really appreciate that you guys are thinking about, you know, the fisher people that do need the fish for their livelihood, but also a way that they could do that sustainably. Was that fishing happening inside the marine protected area, or had the line, you think, maybe just sunk down to the deep sea from farther away, or do we not know?
Well, we've been working on some of the seamounts that are outside of the protected area, so that, you know, we're outside of it right now. When we first showed up at Cocos Island, actually there was a fishing boat inside of the protected area, and as soon as they saw this big ship coming, they turned around and quickly went outside of the border. So in some ways, just our presence is making some contribution in a small way.
That's great. All right. I'm going to go back to Mrs. Martinez's class at Harlow Elementary. Do you guys have one final question or maybe two?
We do have a couple. Here comes Emma.
All right, Emma, here we go.
Hi.
Hi. What's your question, dear?
How many people does it take to operate the ROV?
Great question. How many people does it take
That
to...
is-
You got it?
That's a great question. So at any one time in the control room, there's a pilot who's flying the vehicle. We call it because it seems like flying. There's another pilot on the ROV crew who's using the manipulator, controlling the manipulator arms. There's a scientist who is leading the dive and working with the pilots to get all of the samples. And then there's a technician who is helping to make sure that the stream goes out to YouTube and that we can see all the questions that are coming in. There are two more scientists who are taking notes and logging all of the samples and all of our observations and all the different species as we go. So just that is 6 people. Total on the ROV team, because we're working 12 hours a day and you can't, 2 people can't do that. So they rotate around. And there are 8 ROV pilots who take turn controlling the vehicle and then doing the maintenance that needs to be done when the vehicle's on the surface. And we have 12 scientists on board who are, in addition to the wire flyer and those engineers, they're working with the ROV to collect all the samples, figure out where to go, direct all of that. Did you want to? Well, and everyone else.
And then you have to have people on the bridge operating the ship because the ROV is in constant communication about the location of the ship, so it doesn't get dragged around. So there's at least one, sometimes more people driving the ship in conjunction with the ROV, and then deploying and recovering the ROV uses more ship's crew. So I don't know how many, I guess that adds another 10 people or so to the operation.
Well, and then the engineers that are keeping the engines running, the chefs that are keeping us fed. It goes on and on and on. There's 43 people on board in total. And they are in all of those different specialties, helping us to communicate with you. It takes a wide variety of disciplines of people with different kinds of expertise and interests to run the show.
Fabulous. Thank you, guys. All right. Maybe one more question? Hi, what's your name? Hi, Madison. What's your question?
I know you guys have studied a lot of oceans. What ocean was your favorite to study?
Good question.
That is a tough one. I don't know. I like it out here. This is my favorite, I think. The Pacific is so gigantic. It's made up of so many different parts. I really like working in the Pacific. What about you?
Well, I used to say the Indian Ocean because it was so warm and there were giant sea turtles and dolphins and bioluminescence, but I'm getting converted to this part of the Pacific Ocean. It is so wonderful out here. It has all those, it doesn't have the big sea turtles, but the rest of it, yeah.
That's awesome. All right, we have time for one more. Hi, what's your name?
Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin. Go ahead.
So I know you took a lot of samples. What's the most unusual sample you've gotten?
Great question. They're like, we got to think about this one. We don't know.
What my favorite, they're not unusual to me, but I bet they'd be unusual to you. And these are these giant single-celled organisms on the seafloor as big as your fist that sit on rocks or on mud and stick sediments to themselves in the shape of almost like a flower. It's an amazing large structure that not only supports this one organism, but provides habitat for many others. And we've been seeing a lot of them and collecting a lot of them. And I've been studying them for a long time, but they are pretty unusual for most people.
And
They only live in the deep sea.
And what are they called? I'm sorry, I missed that.
They are called xenophytophores, which in Greek means bearer of foreign bodies.
Very cool. So everybody has some
But
homework.
they are
Go
very
home
cool, and
Google
they're
that.
super abundant down here.
That is so great. What an interesting organism. Dr. Cortez, you have a favorite specimen?
There were so many, but we found this really weird little yellow. We think it's kind of like an anemone, but we don't really know what it is. It's still a total mystery. So that was cool. And then, but the xenoturbellid, which is another long name that maybe you haven't heard before, it looks, you can see clips on the website, but it looks like a big tongue crawling across the seafloor. And I had never seen one alive before. It was pretty remarkable to collect that. Greg Rouse, who is the curator of the Invertebrate Museum at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, was really excited about it. And it's weird. Right. Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. He described the group for the first time. And he happened to be out with us to collect it. So that was pretty exciting.
That's great. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Is there anything that you would like to add before we wrap up here?
No, it was great. Thanks for all of your interest and all your really great questions. And like we said before, go tell your parents all about it. It was a great opportunity to talk to you guys. Yeah, and keep watching the feed. We should be diving tomorrow. And there are lots of other great expeditions to come on the Falkor, and also the other programs, the Nautilus and the Okeanos, that live stream. We're trying to bring deep sea exploration to everybody's living room. So
I love it. And thank you all for your time today, and for letting us aboard your vessel. It was a great time. And thank you everyone for your questions. And hopefully we'll be able to connect in the future on one of those future expeditions. All right. So as we wrap up, thank you. We wanted to tell you guys a little bit about our most current expedition, which just launched this month, and that's called Earth Echo Expedition Plastic Seas. So last October, our team went to Melbourne, Australia to examine plastic pollution in the ocean. We took 25 educators there, along with our co-founder, Philippe Cousteau Jr., to look at the impact of litter and microplastics on the organisms that call Australia home. So with that module, we have created expedition videos. So there are 4 expedition videos that highlight our plastic journey and are hosted by Philippe Cousteau. We also have STEM career close-up videos that will tell you more about the jobs that the people we met along the way do and what they do every day and how they got there. We also have youth in action videos that highlight the amazing youth, a couple of the amazing youth in Australia that are working against that plastic pollution problem. And then last but certainly not least, the 25 Australian teachers that joined us on our Plastic Seas expedition are now fellows, and they have been working for the past 3 months to create a series of STEM design challenges and lessons for teachers to use all around the world for free. They include everything from learning about a product's life cycle to a STEM design challenge for a nurdle capture device. So they're really great and engaging, and they are all available for free for download on earthecho.org, thanks to our presenting sponsor, the Northrop Grumman Foundation. We'd also like to say thank you to all of our Expedition Plastic Seas partners. We couldn't have done it without you. And then last but not least, we would like to tell you about some upcoming events that are happening with Earth Echo. We're very excited to have the Australian launch of our first international expedition, Plastic Seas, with Shalise. Shalise is a young woman who lives in Australia and is doing amazing things to fight the plastic pollution in her community. So that live event will be happening Thursday, February 7th, 10:30 a.m., which is in Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So make sure you do that conversion. It's in the evening for those of us here in the States. Again, we would like to thank the Northrop Grumman Foundation for their generous support of the expedition program and also Earth Echo International. Remember, you can follow along with Earth Echo on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I would also encourage you all to go and follow the Smith Ocean Institute as well. They are posting a lot, and like they said, they have live feeds when they go diving with the ROV, and it's really exciting. So make sure you follow along our journey and their journeys as well. I'd like to thank our classrooms for joining us today and everybody from watching at home and at school. And I would love to give a special shout out to my former school, St. Paul's. Thanks for watching, guys, here in Florida. And we hope that you have a great rest of your day and keep exploring. Bye, everybody.